Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome visitors and guests. I'd like to tell you the story of a guy named Al. Al's brother died, and by mistake, the newspaper wrote a very long obituary about Al. And when he read it, he was horrified. It said that Al is Dr. Doom, that Al is responsible for killing more people in the world than anybody on the planet. And the thought that came to his mind was, oh my God, I don't want to be remembered like that. That's not how I want to be remembered. And so Al created something called the Nobel Prize. And he rewards people for achievements in science, in education, in literature, in medicine, and in science. And just as a side note, Al was the inventor of dynamite. And so, how do you want to be remembered, Rocky? When somebody reads your obituary, what do you want it to say? You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't have to go by your history. Your whole life is here before you. So from today going forward, you can choose to live a life that's more meaningful. I have another story for you. I heard about an African-American woman from Milwaukee who was a maid. And when she was 18 years old, she had a daughter out of wedlock. And this daughter was at home by herself when she was 9 years old, and she was abused by her cousin who was babysitting her. And then a few years later, she was sexually abused by her uncle, and she became pregnant at the age of 14. The baby was born prematurely and died, but the young girl became very antisocial and very, very agitated and was doing very poorly in school. Just by chance, she happened to come across a book, and this book really inspired her. She read the book, and something shifted, and she read it over and over and over again. And she made a decision, just because of this simple book, that she was going to change her life. She started to do better in school. She started to get interested in public speaking, as a matter of fact. And a few years later, she entered a public speaking competition, and she won a 4-year scholarship to college. Now, can you imagine, Cynthia, an African-American woman who was raised in poverty, who had an abusive childhood, who was pretty antisocial, got in a lot of trouble. Can you imagine that this woman would one day become the most famous African-American woman in the world? Well, her name is Oprah Winfrey. And I want to tell you another story of someone who had a remarkable life, but it didn't start off so remarkably. His father was named Abdullah Jamali. He was an immigrant from Syria, and his mother was named Carol Schmidt. She was an American. They had a baby, and they didn't want to keep it, and so they gave it up for adoption. The baby was adopted by a couple in California named Clara and Joe. And as the child grew, it was a middle-class upbringing, he became interested in calligraphy. And he used to enjoy practicing calligraphy. He graduated high school, he went to a college in Oregon. He got kind of disillusioned, and so he dropped out. And then he started to take drugs. LSD. He wanted to find himself, so he went to India and sat with a guru to try and find enlightenment. And while all of this was occurring, he still maintained his interest in calligraphy. He learned a lot about calligraphy when he was in India. Now, Solomon, can you imagine an adopted baby, a college dropout, a drug abuser, would one day become the inventor and chairman of Apple Computer Company, one of the most prestigious computer companies in the world? And Steve Jobs, can you imagine he became an international icon and he changed the world? And I want to tell you about my story. When I was in my 20s, I was very ambitious. I wanted everything. I wanted everything life had to offer. I wanted a great career. I wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted a husband. I wanted a family. I wanted all of these things. And I accomplished all of these things. I achieved all these things. And then in 2008, I got laid off. And I found myself overweight, very unhealthy, and very, very out of shape. So I joined an organization so I could get some help with my weight problem and my eating disorders. And as I became more involved in the organization, I would be asked to speak occasionally, and sometimes I would help people on a one-on-one with the program. And then people started to give me some feedback. They would say, you know, thank you, you're really helping me. Or they would say, you know, you're a role model for me. One lady told me, you know, I am so glad that you came into my life because you transformed me. And I am so grateful for having known you. And you know, that made me feel really, really good. That made me feel really good. Now, what do all these stories have in common? Well, all of these people found their power, found their inner soul, their inner strength, by connecting to something greater than themselves. When they would wake up in the morning, Oprah or Steve Jobs or even Mr. Nobel, they knew that what they were doing was helping their end user, helping their audience, helping their community, helping their country, helping the world. And just by having a connection to something greater than ourselves is why these people had such tremendous success. It is the most gratifying thing in the world. So when you take a look, when you think about what kind of obituary do you want, what do you want people to say about you when you pass away? I hope they will say that you were connected to something greater than yourself, that you did work that benefited other people, that benefited your community, that benefited your country, that benefited, you don't even have to think that big. I'm only benefiting 5 people at the moment with this organization. But those 5 people, it's so enriching. It feels so good to get that feedback, that positive feedback. And connection is what really matters. It matters to what happens now, it matters to what happens next, and it matters to what happens in the future. And it connects us to a state of eternity. And thank you very, very much, Madam Toastmaster.